Art Collins has been with the board since 1996, retired chairman and CEO of Medtronic, senior advisor to Oak Hill Capital Partners, and about to launch a new advisory firm. Directors of Alcoa, Boeing, and Cargill, as well as U.S. Bank. And I was going to make this the grand surprise, but he's also an author of 9 children's books, and they're quite remarkable. I'll have him talk a little bit about that. Here's a guy who would be rightfully accused, based on his great success in life, in business life, of being as left-brained as you can get. I mean, heck, he was overseeing medical devices that literally kept people alive. And yet he has this very strong right brain that shows up in this wonderful children's book skill he has. And I'm here to attest, and I don't mind embarrassing him a little bit, the single most important support that I've received in these last few years, which, believe it or not, in 10 years as your CEO, the last few years have been harder than the first 7 because of the environment we're in and the continued expectations of our company in a difficult time. There's nobody on the earth that I've come to find that I would rather have as my partner than this guy. He's measured, he's thoughtful, he's a guide, he's a counselor, and he helps me think through things more smartly. And I did find out, and I didn't know this in the beginning, his left brain is as strong as I knew it was. His right brain, and I try to work on my right brain, we're both pretty good at it. So we do kind of feel this from more than just the mind. So Art, I welcome you. I thank you for all you do.
Good to be here.
Let's have a seat, and let's talk a little bit about the board. So,
Richard, may I interrupt you?
You can, only you can, because you're my boss, so you can do whatever you want.
I'd like to point out a fact for any of you that were looking at that chart. Did you notice healthcare? The healthcare people that they polled only liked authors. No other type of storytelling. And so if I could digress for maybe 3 minutes, I'd like to tell a story.
Do it.
Is that okay? When I retired as chairman and CEO of Medtronic, which was back in 2008, my predecessor, Bill George, had written some books on business, leadership, strategy, and so a lot of people thought that I may follow suit and write a book on strategy or some business topic. Frankly, I thought the last thing in the world that was needed was another CEO pontificating on leadership and strategy. I thought that would probably be the most boring undertaking I could possibly think of. However, my 2 daughters suggested that I write down a few stories I told them when they were little girls. So I agreed to do it. And the first 3 stories I wrote turned into the first book. Now, I had a secret weapon in trying to hone these books, and the target was kids 8 to 12 years old. My brother, after being a very successful entrepreneur, retired to South Carolina, out on the Isle of Palms. He got tired of canoeing, playing golf, kayaking, so he went back and got a teaching degree and taught 4th grade. So I took these stories, gave them to my brother, and he had his 4th grade classes critique them. And if you know anything about 4th graders, is your Sunday school story, they're not shy and they speak their mind. Now, what I learned out of that whole process was I wasn't writing these books for me. I was writing them for 4th grade kids, give or take a few years. And I understood if I was going to tell a good story and hopefully educate a little bit along the way, I first had to engage my audience. And back to storytelling, and I'd say it pertains to all of you, the first thing you need to do is to engage your audience, your customers, your fellow employees, people in the community. And that was my aha moment, and I think it perhaps is relevant today. I wanted to just put that in.
And I did want to start there because we're asking these good folks to be the best, strongest risk managers you're ever going to know. We're asking them to become more strategists, which is something we worked on yesterday, but we're also asking on storytelling because I think banking is a collection of stories. As Wayne Hirsch said, he reveled in the idea that he actually helped these businesses grow. And as Christine said, she feels the need to pass it along and pay it forward to another 25 years. These are the stories that make it make sense. Otherwise, we're just moving money about and making people loans and collecting on deposits. So I love that way you started there, but I'd also ask you to help us understand, besides the support you have from the 4th graders, What kind of skills are required to kind of become a little more right-brained in a left-brain world? And did you either have them and they were just not being used at Medtronic, or is there a way that you might recommend to these good folks how we can think a little differently and expand our view of everything that we see and decide whether or not there's a possibility in there?
Well, someone told me a long time ago that when I started my business career that you ought to try to push the bounds of what you think you're capable in achieving. If you don't, you'll never fulfill your full potential. Try to do it sometimes in safe environments. If you make a mistake, learn from it. But I would say that one of the things that I found is I wasn't inherently a good storyteller to kids. I could write, I had to write throughout my business career. But I had to go out and practice. And then I had to be willing to take constructive criticism from people that knew a lot more about the topic than I was. And I sought those people out. So the simple answer is just like the Nike commercial, do it. Go out, try it. Get outside of your comfort zone a bit and try new things. And I'll come back to that as another thought I'd like to leave you with as you look at different marketing strategies or approaches is push the bounds on what is convention and try new approaches. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too.
And while you were in medical devices, you guys were innovators and research and patent, all the things that we probably are learning more about in our business as we now get into a less ubiquitous situation. Is there any guidance in terms of leading a company to become more innovative, fast follower, late follower, early path builder? Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we had an old saying in the medical device industry, you either innovate or you evaporate. When I left Medtronic, we had revenues of approximately $14 billion, and we spent each year about 10% of sales, or close to $1.5 billion in research and development. About 40% of our revenues in any given year came from products that weren't even available 4 years previously. So if you didn't continue to innovate and obsolete what you were doing, it wasn't long before your competition did. Now there's a caveat in that, and I think this applies to the bank. You have to have something that is bedrock if you're going to innovate and you're going to push the bounds, because you can't just be flying all over the universe without something that ties you back to what is important. Your core values, your reason for being, the safety factor that you have to keep in mind because you're the custodian of other people's funds is very important. So what we did, we had the Medtronic mission that was very clearly stated and bound all the, at that time, 40,000 employees together, was critical, and it allowed us to have bedrock when we then went out and pushed the boundaries. And I think both of those things are very critical. But in your case, the first thing I think you need to do is to recognize what Jim Collins, no relationship to me, who wrote Good to Great, said, good enough never is. So you've got to, as strong a position as you are in today, and you are in the strongest, we are in the strongest position in the banking industry. We are the company that other banks talk about and try to emulate. You may tell later the story about Wells Fargo.
I will.
But we're not going to stay that way if we continue to do business the way we've done it in the past.
Right. I'll tell that story real fast. Wells Fargo just had their investor day 2 months ago. We got a copy of all their slides. On 6 of the slides, they had to show the rankings of all the banks in all the key categories, 6. In all 6 of the slides, we were number 1 and they were number 2. It killed them. Because to get the category cover, they have to show all the banks, and they just hate us because we're always there. And I heard this from a board member at Wells, who told me how much agitated they were to see the slides of us. And so that's high praise. Art's point, however, and we've been talking a lot about this, is you can't rest on your laurels, but you also need to know why you got there. If you don't know how you got there, you can't repeat it and sustain it. It can't be accidental, which is part of what we've been spending other years on. Yesterday we did something I think you'll find interesting. And I'm going to say, of all the things we told you yesterday, the thing I heard as much about from all of you I chatted with was the cultivation slide. So we put up a CapEx slide, and he's been overseeing CapEx for 25 years. He knows he can work here on CapEx. On the left side, we had obsolescence, maintenance, and growth. And up until this year, you know very well, that's all the choices you had. And Andy and I, as the responsible parties for CapEx and all the steps that go with it, would agree that if you didn't have an absolutely perfect idea, fully tested before it ever happened, guaranteed to be, that's mine. We'll get you one. I mean, I love you, man, but I don't think you want my water.
See, I bring it up, and he
we're really close.
Drinks it.
Yeah, Joe, bring it up. So here we have always had obsolescence. Okay, back to me. Joe's going to get the water over here. Obsolescence, maintenance, and growth. And because we've taught you guys, he's got his water. Until we've taught you guys any other behavior modification, our words were empty if we said, but come in with new ideas, we'll give it a shot. Because our experience said if it was obsolescence, you got it. If it was maintenance, you got it. If it was growth, it had to be perfect. And there was no room for error. So yesterday we introduced what we showed the board last month. Cultivation is the farthest right. And cultivation is everything you've learned and taught at Medtronic, which is this idea of thinking outside the box. Good isn't good enough. And thinking about ideas. These guys have it in their head. And we found that we were stifling new ideas that potentially wouldn't be ever thought about because we didn't introduce. And yet, the obligation of this group, Art, is that they have to know their numbers well enough and know the risks they're taking and at least help us understand and size it. And then we'll try it. And if we try it and it works, great. If we try and it doesn't, we'll kill it and we'll tell everybody else it worked. But it's one of those things that we have this chance to now expand. And this is very consistent with what we talked about yesterday, which is forward-looking. So cultivation aligns brilliantly, and I'm going to give the board some credit. The board, I think of the things you worry about on us, one of them is to not sit on our laurels and to not starve the future of the company and invest in its future. And I thank you for that leadership. They should know you had a big part in that. So yesterday before you got here, we asked them what they'd like to know most from you. And one of the things would be, I'd like you to just kind of paint a picture of the board dynamics. What you would put in words is the board's responsibility, how you feel about the relationship the board has with each other and with the bank. And then particularly if there's anything you would want them to hear, not just in a point of pride, but things that you are most worried about as a board member, as a lead director.
Okay. Well, the board itself, we have 16 members. We may move up or down a few depending on the time and whether we are refreshing the board, which we constantly are doing, or we're in a more steady state. The board members, as you saw through the previous slides, are a diverse group of people in almost any dimension you care to look at. We have a multitude of backgrounds. They come from geographically dispersed parts of the United States. We have people of color, male, female, and a broad range, very importantly on the diversity side, a broad range of thinking. The board meetings, and I'll just take a moment to talk through these because although it's second nature to me and to Richard, it may not be to you. We have generally 6 previously scheduled board meetings a year. They normally take place on a Monday and a Tuesday. Board members will come in and we'll have a series of committee meetings that take place on, if the first day is Monday. And we will get a lot of the work done for the board through committees, and that's an important fact. The board cannot, in its entirety, oversee the broad range of activities and execute the broad range of responsibilities themselves. So we split into committees. We have an executive committee, which doesn't meet all that often. We have a governance committee. We have a compensation and human resources committee. We have a community reinvestment and public policy committee. We have an audit committee, and we have a risk committee. And we're thinking about the possibility of, I don't know if you shared with them.
Actually, let's do.
Well, go ahead.
We're thinking about adding a capital planning committee because with stress testing, with living wills, all the capital liquidity issues that have been coming about, we're thinking it's too much to put on the risk committee of the board because the risk committee is also operating risk and some credit risk. So with our collective decisions and with the oversight of the regulator's approval, we're likely to add a 6th formal committee of the board that will be capital planning, and will be comprised of 4 or 5 members like the rest of them.
So the afternoon, some of the committees meet. We will then, either late in the afternoon or perhaps the next day, generally have a board education topic or a discussion of a particular line of business. We will then meet at dinner with the executive group, and we generally invite in anywhere from 3 to 6 other executives from different parts of the business. We start early the next morning with committee meetings that didn't take place the day before, and then we move into our board meeting. There are certain standing agendas at all board meetings. We get an update on the risk status of the company, of the bank. We go over where we stand on certain ratios. We get an update on the financial condition of the bank. We will start that board meeting with an executive session with Richard and Andy, and the two of them will talk to us about whatever is on their mind, and we will ask questions. Then we get into the flow of the meeting with the normal topics I talked about. A few times a year we will have regulators come in and speak to us, the OCC, the Fed, the CFPB, and we'll hear their view. I, as lead director, will meet at least on a quarterly basis with the OCC and the Fed. Bill Parker does a great job, I see you up front, preparing me for that meeting. And I guarantee you that if the lead director is not prepared, the regulators will know that, and that's not a good thing for the bank. We have a lot of give and take. This is a very engaged board. It's a board that does its homework before it arrives. You should all know that we receive a very extensive briefing packet. Thank God we have moved to iPads from paper. We're not killing as many trees. We're not stressing the director's arms carrying these heavy notebooks around. But I would guess that for every hour that I spend in a board meeting or a committee meeting, I spend at least an hour to an hour and a half in preparation before I get to Minneapolis or wherever the board meeting takes place. And by the way, we tend to run either 2 or 3 meetings a year of the 6 in Minneapolis, and then we move around the country for the other meetings. The board is good in that everyone speaks up when they have something to say, but they don't speak up just to be heard. Right. It's a healthy board. There are not, and some boards, fortunately, none of the ones I serve on, you can have a board within a board, or you can have cliques. None of that exists on this board. We are all equal members. We may have different responsibilities, but we're all equal members. We then, at the end of the meeting with management, Richard will excuse the members of his executive team, and we'll have another one-on-one executive session with Richard, anything that he would like to discuss. Then I will ask Richard to leave us, and the independent board members will meet in executive session. They will talk about anything that is on their mind. I will take copious notes if copious notes are needed. And then immediately following the board meeting, I will sit with Richard and give him any feedback that takes place. The last thing I would tell you about the board, one of our major responsibilities is to evaluate the CEO. We do that each year. We evaluate the board as a whole, a committee structure. And this is a process I started, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago when I was the chair of the governance committee. The chair of the governance committee at the end of the year calls every single board member and has a private telephonic conversation with that board member, essentially asking 3 questions. Tell me how you think the board as a whole is functioning and the committees on which you serve. 2, tell me how you as a board member are performing. And are you willing to stand for re-election again? And 3, is there anything else that you have on your mind that you would like to share with me? The chair of the governance committee talks to all the board members, takes notes, reviews that again with Richard, and then summarizes that for the full board. I think it's a good process. The whole topic of director evaluation is a thorny one, and there's not a consensus within corporate America. But that tends to be the flow of the regularly scheduled board meetings. Occasionally we'll have a telephonic board meeting, but those are few and far between, particularly after we got through 2007, 8, and 9, when we were having many of those telephonic board meetings on Friday afternoon, having to make a decision, would we purchase a bank that was going to be purchased by someone by Monday morning. So that's the.
So let's add to that, because first of all, it's very important you understand this board is very collegial, gets along well, but is very comfortable talking their mind. This call about that he does, this is the best practice, allows them without attribution. You didn't get to say that, but it will never be said who said what. So this is a fine chance for the board to self-evaluate individually and collectively whether or not we have a weak person in the board or whether we're concerned about something that's emerging that the lead director or the chairman might not know. In the time we've been together, nothing's been more poignant, though, than the movement from the board being an overseer to providing credible challenge. And as this group knows, the OCC actually has a stated intent that the board shall show evidence of credible challenge at every step. Laura Bednarski, who's our corporate secretary, does a remarkable job of minutes writing, now becomes one of the most important people because she has to capture not only the facts of a conversation, but the sentiment and the challenge. And I wondered if you might just talk about how that challenge gets transferred into the way you run the board and how the board members communicate with us.
Yeah, I think that you use the word credible challenge. I insert another C word in there, credible constructive challenge. Yeah. I think it's the responsibility of a board member to push back on areas that are important and perhaps not as well understood as they could be, to make sure that we are not micromanaging, but at least drilling down in certain very important areas to ensure that management has done its homework, understands the facts, and is taking a prudent course forward. This has always been, I think, a hallmark of a good board, but it's been more institutionalized since the financial crisis of 2007 and 8 and 9. Some said it went on after that. When the regulators got caught and were embarrassed and imposed a whole different level of regulation, some of which were needed, some of which were not. I'd add one other point, and that is that one of the ways the board has evolved over time is, and then there are a number of ways, is we have been required to take on a much greater regulatory oversight, acting in some ways as a surrogate arm of the OCC or the Fed or the CFPB, FDIC not quite as much. And I will tell you, as the lead director and a board member who has watched this bank evolve over 20 years, there is a concern that I have, and I pointed this out, that if you look at the amount of time that this board spends in a board meeting, a disproportionately large percentage of the time is spent on regulatory oversight, form and substance, as opposed to how do we continue to grow the bank? How do we continue to take market share? How do we continue to delight our customers? How do we continue to position this bank not for next year or the year after, but for 10 years in the future? How do we continue to take advantage of significant evolving trends in information technology that are going to reshape and are reshaping the banking system? So as board members, we have to almost fight to ensure that we are fulfilling our fiduciary responsibilities, regulatory-wise and otherwise, but also to exercise our responsibility to the shareholders of this company and, for that matter, to the employees to ensure that we have a vital and growing entity going forward.
So let's build on that a little bit. I want you all to know that our board, starting with Art, have also been put in a place of kind of defensive overseer. And when we feel we've been unfairly required to do something or unfairly measured against something, I can share that carefully with the regulators and let it be known that we're not very happy, but they still can do a great deal of harm to us, so we're very thoughtful about it. I can't even tell you how important it is to have a partner where if he's going to meet with the regulators, he does all the time, one-on-one often, that he can at least reinforce the very same things that we're concerned about, because coming from him has an entirely different level of interest from the regulators, because it's not just me. And so we've had the regulators come in, and every time they come, we open it up for questions. And the board, because they're diplomatic, have been very careful, but they do not hesitate to raise their hand and say, I don't understand why you would expect a bank of this quality to have the same requirements as, say, another bank. And they'll ask it. And no matter what, when the regulators leave, I know you know this, Art, but they feel first that this board, if they would challenge them in a thoughtful way, they'll challenge management, which is good. And it also helps greatly to reinforce some of the very concerns that we have at the senior level where we interact with the regulators, and not everything does seem fair or equitable or transparent. So I want to give it up to the board and want you to know that they've got this extra role they didn't have to have before, which is, first of all, understanding it well enough to talk about it. Secondly, understanding our perspective and agreeing with it. Sometimes they may not. And all those things come together, being appropriately assertive with the regulators to let them know that we're not as pleased as we'd like to be with some of the things that we're hearing about and seeing. And I just think that deserves a little bit of credit, and you'd agree that wasn't there 5 years ago. That's an entirely different responsibility. We've asked this group to perform at the highest levels. You know, as the lead director, whenever I meet with Art, we should also say that I meet with him personally one-on-one before every board meeting. He oversees the agenda, oversees the schedule of committee meetings. We make sure all the topics are organized in the right way. I tell him what we're going to do in executive session, both at the beginning and the end, and then he informs all of that on behalf of the board. When we do our one-on-one meetings, we always talk about you guys. And he'll often say, how's the team feeling? And he means this team. And are they tired? Are they proud? Are they run down? Or how's this current, the Brexit, when Brexit hits and there's no more interest rate increases, how's the group going to go? He's the guy who sits next to me and decides things like, you know what, we are going to do the right thing by our shareholders, and we're going to make sure that our plan is the plan, and when things don't happen like they're supposed to, we do our best to adjust to it. But because of his support, we did the all-employee stock grant. Unprecedented, all industry-wide, because he appreciated the fact that we... Right. But that's the level of support, because they do really run the company. But my point to you, Art, is what do you think is a better way? You're both an insider and a customer and an investor. You're all of our constituencies. How can we tell our story better?
Well, you have at least 67,000 storytellers.
Right.
It's not just the group in this room. And one of the things that I always did when I was running Medtronic, and one of the things that I enjoyed doing more than anything, was to go out and walk around the manufacturing facilities on the floor, go into the research labs and ask the engineers and scientists what they were working on, go out in the field with the sales reps and scrub in and watch our products being used in surgery, to get right down at ground zero. And wherever I travel around the United States, and there is a U.S. bank branch, I will walk in and I will talk to the tellers. How do you like working
right,
here?
John?
And to John's dismay, I listen to what they say. I not only walk in and talk to the tellers, I walk around the building. I look to see how clean it is around the building. I look to see when the windows were last washed. And if I don't like what I see, I know who to contact. And I'm not the only one that does this. Family members do it. And I will come up with ideas on something you might want to try.
Yeah.
Some of them are harebrained, some of them may not be. The key is for you to figure out which is
That's
which.
right. John does a good job.
But I could go back. You have 67,000 employees. They're all storytellers. I think first and foremost, you need to engage them. You need to give them a voice. Because I can tell you, the ones I come in contact are proud to work for U.S. Bank. And you want to harness that pride. But you have to give them the storyline. You can't let them go out and just tell whatever comes to mind.
We didn't rehearse this. This is exactly
So, no, we
about.
didn't.
No.
Am I doing okay?
At all. Yeah, we didn't. I'm using notes, so.
So you need to let them know what it is this bank stands for, where this bank is headed. You have to do it succinctly enough that they understand. Your words need to be clear enough that they understand. You need to, and not just Richard, talk passionately enough that they will take that passion and allow it to be their passion. And you have to talk enthusiastically enough and definitively enough that you move them to action. It's not magic, but it's hard work. And it starts with all of you at the top of the organization coming together and agreeing on what this bank is and where it is headed and how we're going to get there.
Okay, high five on that. High five. That's exactly what we talked about. Yes.
The greatest, I was when I came out of business school at Wharton, I went to work for Booz Allen and Hamilton, a management consulting firm. And we had an old adage that you could take the 100 best plan, and if you didn't implement it, if you didn't execute it, it wasn't worth anything. You could take an 80% plan. It may have been not the greatest, but good enough, but if you executed, Katie barred the door. Right. So I think it's a combination of getting your message down, giving them rationale about why this is important. And believe me, it's one of the things that when I push back on regulators, I make sure they understand that, do you understand what this country would be like, what this world would be like without a well-functioning banking system? Do you recognize that when U.S. Bank acquires other entities, those entities become better and less of a potential headache for you? But it's important that your employees and all of you know not only where you're headed, how you're going to get there, but why it is so important that you are successful.
Perfect. We have 10 minutes. A couple more questions. I want to give you the last. When you're at the Boeing board or the Alcoa board or all the boards, and someone says, "Oh, you're a lead director at U.S. Bank. What prideful thing would you first say about us? What are you most proud of about our company?" How would you tell it to somebody else?
Can I tell you another little story?
Yeah, you're a storyteller. We're all about
all right.
that. So,
little known fact. Richard knows this. Most of you don't. Before the Risk Committee became the Risk Committee, it was the Finance Committee. And you know who ran the Finance Committee in the 5 years leading up to 2007, 2008? Guess. Yeah, yours truly. We had we had a number of tenets that guided us, but there were two in particular. And they really played out when we would have sometime members of management come to us, most often from the field, saying, "You know something? We just can't compete with WAMU. We just can't compete with Countrywide. They're doing things that we're not allowed to do." And our two tenets were pretty simple. We said, if you want to take less profit on a good loan to compete, go for it. If you want to take a lot of profit on a lousy loan, no dice. The second tenet, we may be dumb. We may not be as smart as all you guys, but if you can't explain to us what these instruments are that you want to get involved with, no dice. Two very simple tenets. And what I am very proud of is that as we came through this period that was difficult for all banks, including U.S. Bank, we came out of it in better shape than anyone. Don't underestimate that. That has given us the ability to do what we are doing now. This gave us the ability to control our destiny. A decade, 15 years ago, I was in board meetings when we were talking about how do we position ourselves so someone doesn't acquire us.
That's right.
And if we're going to be acquired, who would we rather be acquired by? Boy, that's not anything like the situation today. So what I'm proud of is, okay, we're the 5th largest bank. And by the way, we're in kind of a sweet spot. If you look at
Goldilocks.
If you look, you look at Citi and you look at Wells, they're at about 1.7 plus billion in assets, and you look at J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America, they're, 2.5 thereabouts. We're at this 420, 450, and then there's, a lot of little guys. This is not the way I want you to refer to yourself, but when I was running Abbott Diagnostics, I kind of liked this to be the snake in the grass that can kind of go around. But I'm proud of the fact that we have come through this terribly difficult time in a position where we control our destiny. We are on the move. We are confident but not arrogant. And by the way, whether you talk to people in the investment community, in higher education, other business people, they now know who U.S. Bank is.
To have an amen to that, right? Hallelujah. What are you most worried about for us?
I can tell you a few things.
You don't have to have too many.
I'm worried that the yield curve is not going to get back to where it should be. God forbid it gets inverted, but it's way too flat now. On that line. I'm also concerned that we're in an environment economically and politically that there's great uncertainty still, right, and that the public doesn't like uncertainty. And while I hope we get that last interest rate at the end of this year,
me too.
I don't see an environment where we're going to anytime soon get back to the way it was. I'm worried about the regulatory environment. I don't think we're going to go back. Hopefully, it's not going to, with whoever is the next president, be quite as difficult as it has been recently. Hopefully the Neil Kashkaris of the world will not prevail.
We talked about that.
I'm not worried, but I'm anxious that we figure out how we're going to harness some of these megatrends that are going on. How do we harness big data? How do we harness information technology? How do we position ourselves not only against existing competitors, but those emerging competitors? I understand you did a newspaper headline exercise yesterday, and Richard was telling me he wonders if Google was in the room back here, what they would come up with. So I'm not worried, but I'm anxious that we continue to realistically and responsibly push the limits. But I have great faith in this bank, and And I have great faith in the people that essentially are the bank. Because when it comes down to it, one person's view, one director's view, is that as much as it's great to have ATMs, the 5,000 ATMs around the United States, and by the way, whenever I go someplace, I will take pictures and send. I just sent Richard pictures of ATMs.
Yes.
And,
some people take pictures of trees and things, but like ATMs.
and that it's great to do online banking, et cetera. This is a relationship business. It really is. And I hope we never lose sight of that. And if you think about it for a moment, the most loyal individuals to whatever institution, it's all about the relationship. I'm a Cubs fan. I hope this is the year.
Good for you.
I have a relationship with the Cubs, and I'm going to be a good fan for them. I can't say no matter what, but almost no matter what. And the nice thing about relationships is that they make up for a lot. The bad thing about a relationship is you can lose it.
That's right.
So I think
closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts. First and foremost, I am exceedingly proud to have been and to continue to be a director of this bank. I have watched this bank evolve over 20 years. I have watched the mergers of U.S. Bancorp and First Bank Systems, of Star and First Star and Mercantile come in. I watched the big one come together. I've watched CEOs transition through the Grundhofers to Richard. Transitions continue. I think at the end of the day, all of you should feel really blessed that you are with U.S. Bank at this point in time. This is a seminal moment. There are certain points of time that you can look back on an institution or on a career and say, this time really mattered. And you, I guarantee you, will look back on this period of time years from now in two different ways, in one of two different ways. You'll either look back at this period of time and say, this is when we had our opportunity to move forward in a way that no one would have expected and positions this bank for decades to come. And we blew it. Or you'll look back and say, that was that shining moment, and boy, did we take advantage of it. And it's not just for you, it's for that third generation banker and for all the bankers that will come after this. I have no doubt that you'll look back on that period of time in the second way. So again, thanks for inviting me to come and talk to you. Have a good end of session, a great finish to the last half of this year, and all of you, a rewarding career.
Let me just close where I started. Lead director role came about maybe 10 years ago in corporate governance, and I also have the privilege of being a lead director somewhere else. And when you're a director, you know your obligations. You are a governor, you're an overseer, you're a protector, you're a guide, you're a counselor. When you're the lead director, it's entirely more important that all of those things become personal and not just fundamental. They're much more heart-driven than they are just mind-driven. If you're lead director of a bank, and you've been part of the bank for 20 years and seen all those changes, particularly those that are here today, I just want to embarrass you a little bit by saying, as I said at the outset, these last few years have been the most challenging for me of the 10. These last 3, I've had the privilege of being your partner, or you're mine. He's taken this responsibility so deeply, personally, and so completely that I just want you guys to know that he represents a group of 14 other people that are equally devoted, but no one's quite as important to me as he is. And Art, I'm telling you this way because I ask these guys, these good people, to come together once a year, and when we do, I want them to believe that everybody in this room is doing as hard a work and is doing as good a job as they are at what they do, even if they don't exactly know what everyone does. And to leave here with a sense of the power of the team and what we can accomplish and what we will accomplish because everyone's working as hard and as competent as they are. You've added an element I've never had in all the years we've done this to help them see firsthand that the governors of this company, the protectors and the overseers under your leadership are exactly of the same level of commitment and competence and capability and engagement. And now they get to leave knowing it's not just the team that's present, but we have a board of directors, starting with you, that are there for us to make sure that we stay on the right course, but to be there to celebrate each milestone. And your seminal moment close is exactly what I could have hoped for, which is every moment is important. We are at a point in time now where we are a very good company, striving to be even better and setting ourselves with much less limits to be what's ever possible. And our phrase, to be the bank of possible, is particularly, I think, appropriate at this point in stage in the lifeblood of America and banking industry and for everybody in this room. And so I just want to thank you for your leadership, your guidance, and personally, I think you know this, but I don't mind them knowing, I don't really have anywhere else to go. I can go to the management team and get their opinion on things. I can drive Teresa nuts with questions and things, but it's important. We all have these people in our lives that are there at the right time and sometimes magically to help us move through important periods. This is my partner, and it wasn't set up to be this way, but you can see how aligned we are and what matters and how proud we are of all of you and what we've accomplished and what we will accomplish. So ladies and gentlemen, give it up for our lead director, Art Collins. That was really good. Really good. Thank you. Appreciate it.